Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer here at Fido Alliance. I'd like to thank you for joining today's Virtual Authenticate Summit. It's been great to see such a strong response to these summits, and I'm happy to kick things off today by giving a quick overview on the imperative of Fido authentication for government services. It goes without saying that today's identity or regulatory environment is very complex, whether that's looking at specific regulations such as PSD2 or emerging digital identity trends in general. There's a lot of activity. It's a very exciting and dynamic environment. I personally have been involved in the identity management space for around 20 years, and I can say that the pace of implementation for some very long-standing digital identity concepts has been greatly accelerated over the past 2 to 3 years. This is due partly to general technical and infrastructure advancements, but I think there are two other real drivers that are happening in the landscape today. For starters, COVID-19 created an imperative to really accelerate digital transformation activities to help thwart off the spike in attacks, right? So when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden, everyone was at home. So whether that's a government worker or the e-citizenry who needed to access government services, they needed to immediately have digital access to things at the same time as hackers took note of this and really ramped up their attacks, whether it's traditional phishing attacks or the big spate of ransomware attacks we've seen. So much of this has been driven by COVID-19, which has also led to the rapid implementations of new best practices in user authentication. But secondly, there's been a realization from global governments that foundational elements required to enable digital identity at scale are now in place. So this is ushering in a lot of exciting innovation in digital wallets and similar concepts that are being rolled out in Europe and worldwide. But all of this activity brings a requirement for modern authentication schemes that go far beyond passwords and even beyond traditional multi-factor authentication. I think all of us can relate to the fact that strong authentication is a necessity, and more explicitly, that passwords are no longer enough. Right? As end users, we all understand the challenges of passwords. They're clumsy, they're hard to remember, but most importantly, they're a massive security risk. They're easy to phish, they're easy to harvest and replay. Fundamentally, they sit on a server and they're human readable. And anything on a server can and eventually will be stolen. And that's where so many phishing attacks and scalable attacks happen. Additionally, traditional means of MFA, such as SMS and OTPs, really aren't an answer either, right? Look, they're much better than a password alone, but they are still inconvenient. They have deliverability issues, and they're still phishable. All right, so that's really the challenge that we face, and that's what we need to move beyond. And this was also the landscape that Fido inherited when we launched just over 8 years ago. Our goal from day one was to transform the market away from dependence on centrally stored shared secrets to one that's a little bit more decentralized in nature and allows users to leverage devices they use every day to securely access online services. It needs to be simpler, stronger authentication that's more secure, that's better usability than both passwords and OTPs alike. It's open standards for simpler, stronger authentication using public key cryptography, single gesture, phishing resistant, possession-based authentication. That's what Fido's been focused on since day one, and we're seeing implemented at scale now throughout the world. This is who backs Fido Alliance. This is our board of directors of around 40 companies. It's really who needs to be working together to help lead the strategy and vision for Fido Alliance. We have companies that create the platforms and devices that are shipping at massive scale. We have leaders in security, identity, and biometrics. Then last but not least, we have the service providers whose businesses are dependent on the ability to deliver high assurance services to billions of users worldwide. Beyond our board, we have hundreds of members. We have over 250 members worldwide, including sponsor members who help build out the Fido working groups. We have associate members who help comprise the growing Fido certified ecosystem. We have government members who take part to give guidance on government-related activities. And then last but not least, we have liaison members and partners. So we partner with other .orgs to address adjacent use cases and drive education to global audiences. Very briefly, I want to walk you through how Fido authentication works. So historically, this is kind of the relationship people have had with logging on to online services. There's a user and there's a server. And to secure access to that server, the user provides a password that sits on that server. Then when he or she goes to log in, if that password matches, she's granted access to the service. The problem, of course, with that model is that that password is human readable and anyone could pretend to be this user and log in and take over that account. So what Fido introduces a very important concept called the Authenticator. The Authenticator, if you will, mediates this authentication relationship. And unlike the traditional approach to user authentication, what Fido introduces is a concept of a key pair. This is, again, using public key cryptography. So instead of a password on the server, we have a public key, and the private key stays safely on the user's device. For the private key to be activated, whether that's to enroll the account or to authenticate, the user must verify herself. And she can verify herself either through possession, so for example, just touching a security key, or through a biometric, which is actual user verification of matching her biometric to the device. That's what enables the private key to be utilized, if you will. During the authentication process, there is a challenge response mechanism that a lot of metadata is exchanged, and the matching needs to be just so, of course, between the public key and private key to allow the authentication to be complete. So that's what Fido's approach to user authentication looks like. And the thing about this approach is that it aligns very well with global regulation and policy, right? So we see explicit fit with things like GDPR and PSD2. We engage with various NGOs who are driving adoption of modern authentication, groups like the World Bank, World Economic Forum, and such. We have a lot of government members, again, taking part in Fido, who, for whom the Fido approach strongly resonates. And then, of course, following that, we see a lot of implementations of Fido for government services. You'll hear from some of these during the talks today. And beyond implementations, there's a growing trend of government recognition of Fido or government guidance citing Fido. And again, you'll get more details on these throughout the day. A couple of things worth highlighting, though, I think, are groups like the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and the UK Government Digital Service and Cabinet Office, both of whom explicitly recommend utilization of Fido security keys to help secure government services. And all of this is happening because Fido is on a mission, and we're rapidly becoming part of the DNA of the web itself. In fact, I would argue that for Fido to be successful, we need to uproot or supplant passwords as part of the web's DNA. And there's three key things that need to happen for this to become reality. First of all, we need to see strong industry standardization and collaboration, right? So I already talked about how we have so many companies collaborating inside of Fido Alliance. We also collaborate externally to drive our standards into reality, right? So we submit all of our specifications to formal standardization bodies such as ISO, ITU, and W3C. And this collaboration, especially, for example, at W3C, has led to success in our second key goal that we need to have, which is to have the technology shipping in devices and platforms at massive scale. So going back to the W3C example, several years ago, when Fido was working on our Fido 2.0 web APIs, the decision was made to submit them to W3C for formal standardization in what became the Web Authentication Working Group. And a lot of the same people who sit inside of Fido's technical working groups would sit inside the WebAuthn working group. And this is where WebAuthn, the WebAuthn protocol, came from. And through this joint work with W3C, we saw immediate support for WebAuthn and Fido authentication in all leading browsers. And then the platform vendors followed suit. So now you have Fido authentication built into every leading web browser, and also every modern device, from every modern Apple device, Windows device, and Android device, all of whom can support Fido authentication. And the key thing there for service providers and governments alike is knowing that if you deploy Fido, that the users can consume it, that they'll be able to log in. So that's a very important second point to becoming part of the web's DNA. And the last point, which we'll talk about extensively today, is seeing strong regulatory and government embrace. So we talked about some of these citations. You'll learn more about them later today. We think this is a very critical element to helping drive adoption and comfort and confidence in a new technology, and that includes Fido. So with progress on all three of these things happening, it's little wonder that we're seeing a growing number of implementations of Fido authentication. And this is just a small subset of companies and organizations who have deployed Fido. But what you'll see is that this spans use cases, this spans borders, this spans deployment styles. Really, there's a fit for Fido, or Fido authentication can fit into a wide array of deployment types. And you'll hear today specifically from Authn Govt and NHS on how they use Fido to support their government services. Now, it's important to note that while Fido's initial focus has been on addressing user authentication, we're now expanding our focus to address two adjacent work areas that are critical to hardening systems from attackers. So we're filling these gaps in adjacent work areas. Specifically, they're around device and user verification and onboarding. So first, we need to strengthen identity verification assurance to support better account recovery. Simply put, we need an approach to account onboarding that moves away from knowledge-based factors to one that's focused on possession-based factors. This not only helps address the account recovery challenge, but also prevents social engineering, which is a potential backdoor into account takeovers. Secondly, we're looking to take the password out of IoT through our Fido device onboard specs, which have now been released to the public. So we won't be going into depth on either of these topics today, but more information, including presentations and recordings of webinars, are available on our website. As we move into the main part of the agenda today, I think these are three themes for you to look at across today's session. And this is where the Fido imperative is really helping governments with their deployments. First, there's an imperative to protect online accounts for citizens and employees. That's first and foremost what we're trying to do, is allow more secure access and prevent account takeovers for citizen and government services. Secondly, it's important to create simpler sign-in experiences. Simply put, if a technology is too complex, users won't use it. History is littered with examples of MFA that were too complex for users to use, and as such, we saw opt-in rates decline over time. So with Fido's approach, again, leveraging devices that are in users' hands today, we believe that the simpler sign-in experience will allow for broader utilization of modern authentication in government services. And last but not least, it's important to enable trust in the government ecosystem. This comes through the engagement Fido is doing with different regulators and government bodies. Ultimately, it will be manifested through the secure implementation of digital identity services to citizens worldwide. So as you can see here, we have a very exciting lineup. We have excellent speakers. We're very grateful for the time they've all put into speaking today and for making themselves available. I encourage you to ask questions when possible and to dig in and to hear what each of these speakers has to say. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today. We look forward to getting your feedback and to seeing you at a future Authenticate event. Thank you and enjoy.